I was standing maybe 12 feet away when it happened. 12 feet. Close enough to see the sweat on the back of the man's neck. Close enough to hear the exact sound the water made when it hit. And close enough to see the guard's eyes, and I'll tell you about those eyes in a minute, because they're the part one keep coming back to when I lie awake thinking about that day. But let me back up. Because if I just jump to that moment, you won't understand what made it so awful. You won't understand why the crowd went so quiet so fast, like someone had pressed mute on the whole street. It was a Tuesday in late July. One of those London mornings that tricks you. You wake up and the sky is doing this pale, washed out blue thing, the kind of blue that makes you think, okay, maybe today will be different, maybe today won't be gray and damp, and then, by 11 o'clock the clouds have rolled back in and the air feels thick and heavy, like the city is breathing on you. I'd been in London for 4 days at that point. Solo trip. Something I'd promised myself I'd do after a rough year, just pack a bag, get on a plane, walk around a city I'd never seen, eat food I couldn't pronounce, and remind myself the world was bigger than my apartment and my problems. So there I was. Tourist. Camera around my neck, coffee in one hand, the tail end of a croissant in the other, making my way down the mall toward Buckingham Palace like every other person who visits London and has absolutely no idea what they're actually supposed to do when they get there. The crowd near the palace gates was already thick by 10 in the morning. That's the thing nobody tells you about Buckingham Palace before you go, it's not a peaceful, majestic experience. It's loud. It's crowded. It smells like sunscreen and bus exhaust. There are people holding selfie sticks in every direction, children crying because they're bored and hot, tour guides shouting into little microphones, pigeons doing pigeon things completely without shame. But, despite all of that, and, I mean this, there's still something about the place that gets to you. Maybe it's the architecture. Maybe it's the history pressing down on everything, this invisible weight of centuries. Or maybe it's the guards. Because the guards are something else entirely. I'd seen photos before, obviously. Everyone has. The tall figure, the red tunic, the enormous black bearskin hat that looks almost absurd until you're standing in front of one and realize it's not absurd at all, it's designed to make you feel small. And it works. The one I noticed that morning was posted on the outer path, just to the left of the main gate. He was young, I'd guess early 20s, though it's hard to tell under all that uniform. Tall. Absolutely still. His rifle held at his side, his chin level, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance that didn't exist in our world. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was looking through everyone. I remember thinking, what is that like? Standing there while hundreds of strangers photograph you, point at you, talk about you like you're a statue. What does it do to a person, maintaining that discipline, that stillness, while the rest of the world spins noisily around you? I took a few photos. Felt slightly guilty about it, the way you always do when you photograph a real person who can't react. Then, I found a spot along the barrier to stand and just watch. That's when I first noticed the group. There were 5 of them, 4 guys and a girl. Mid-20s. Loud in that specific way that a certain kind of group gets loud when they're trying to perform for each other. They were already at the barrier when I arrived, already in the middle of some kind of ongoing bit. One of them, the tallest one, wearing a white linen shirt with the sleeves pushed up and sunglasses pushed back on his head, kept doing this exaggerated impression of the guard. Stiff posture, puffed chest, blank stare. His friends thought it was hilarious. The girl was filming on her phone. I noticed them but didn't think much of it. You see this kind of thing constantly near tourist sites. People get giddy. They want content. They push the boundaries a little because they think nothing will actually happen. The guards are famous for their composure. Everyone knows the stories, people screaming in their faces, waving things, all of it, and the guards just stand there. Unmoved. Like stone. That reputation, I think, is what gave this group permission to push further than they should have. The tall one, I'll call him the instigator, because I never learned his name and that's what he was, started making comments loud enough for the guard to hear. Nothing cruel at first. Just dumb jokes. Mate, does your hat get heavier when it rains? Laughter from the group. Do you dream in black and white like your uniform? More laughter. The guard didn't react. Of course he didn't. Which seemed to frustrate the instigator in a way he couldn't quite contain. There's a particular kind of person who reads dignity as a challenge. Who sees composure and thinks, I want to crack that. Not out of genuine malice, necessarily, sometimes just out of ego, out of some restless need to feel like they affect the world, that they can make things happen. The instigator was that kind of person. I could see it in the way his energy shifted when the guard kept ignoring him. His jokes got a little louder. His posture got a little more aggressive. He started drifting closer to the barrier. The crowd around them was doing that thing crowds do, the collective pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. I shifted my weight, instinctively moving slightly closer. Not because I planned to do anything. Just because something in me registered, this is moving in a direction. The instigator turned to his friends and said something I couldn't hear. They laughed. The girl kept filming. One of the other guys was shaking his head slightly but still smiling, in that way people smile when they're uncomfortable but don't want to say anything. Then, the instigator reached into his bag. He pulled out a plastic water bottle, the cheap kind, half empty. He held it up to his friends with this theatrical look on his face, like a magician about to reveal a trick. His eyebrows raised. His smile spread. And I felt something go cold in my chest. Not because I knew exactly what was coming, but because I could feel the shape of it. I could feel the crowd feeling it too, this collective intake of breath, invisible but real, like the air pressure changing before a storm. No, someone near me murmured quietly. Not to anyone. Just to the universe. The instigator turned back toward the guard. He called out something I didn't fully catch, something performative, something that got a nervous giggle from his group, and then he twisted the cap off the bottle. He held it out over the barrier. And he poured it. The water caught the light as it fell. That sounds like something from a film. Like I'm adding poetry to the moment to make it more dramatic. But, I'm telling you honestly, that's what I saw. The arc of it, the way the late morning sun hit those droplets before they landed across the guard's shoulder, the side of his face, soaking into his collar, was almost beautiful in the most sickening way. The sound it made was small. A soft, wet slap. Then, silence. Not total silence. The street was still full of noise of buses, pigeons, the distant bark of a tour guide, a child somewhere asking why we were stopping. But, the immediate bubble of space around that moment went completely still, the way a room goes still when something breaks that shouldn't have broken. The instigator laughed first. It was a sharp, short laugh. The kind that has nervousness in it, not just amusement. Like even he hadn't entirely believed he was going to do it until he did it. His friends followed a half-second later, the girl's phone still raised and recording, though her smile had tightened around the edges. But, then, the laughter stopped. Because the guard moved. Not dramatically. Not explosively. No shouting, no sudden lunge. He turned his head. Just that. A slow, deliberate turn. And, his eyes, which had been aimed at that point in the middle distance, that nowhere point shifted and found the instigator's face. I said I'd come back to those eyes. This is where I come back. There was no anger in them. That's the part one keep trying to explain when I tell this story, and people always expect me to say he looked furious, he looked terrifying. He didn't look furious. What he looked was present. Fully, completely present in a way that he hadn't been a second before, in a way that made the air feel different. He had been stone. Now he was a person. And, somehow that was more unsettling than any expression of rage would have been. The instigator's smile dropped. He hadn't expected the eye contact. Nobody had. The whole bit had relied on the guard staying exactly where he always was, locked in his performance of stillness, safely unreachable. The moment actual human contact landed across that space between them, the whole joke collapsed. You could see it happening on the instigator's face. this micro-series of emotions cycling through surprise, something like guilt, and, then, the most painful one, the sudden awareness of an audience that was no longer laughing with him. Because the crowd had turned. Not physically, not all at once. But, the energy had shifted, that invisible thing that happens in public spaces when the mood of a group recalibrates around a new understanding of what's actually happening. People who had been watching with vague amusement were now watching with something harder in their faces. An older woman near me had her hand pressed to her mouth. A man with 2 small children had pulled his kids slightly behind him, the way parents do when something unpredictable is in the air. Someone said, "That's not okay." Not loudly. Just a statement of fact, directed at nobody. But, the instigator heard it. The way he stiffened told me he heard it. Now here's what I have to be honest about, because I've told this story a few times now and I sometimes get asked, did the guard break protocol? Did he step out of his post? Did he do something he wasn't supposed to do? And, the answer is complicated. What happened next is something I've replayed in my mind probably 200 times, trying to make sure I'm remembering it right and not filling in the gaps with what I wanted to happen. The guard held the eye contact for, I'd guess 5 seconds, maybe 6. It felt much longer. Then, without any sudden movement, without raising his voice, he turned his face back to the middle distance. He resumed his stillness. But, something had changed in his posture. A tiny thing, barely visible, but I was close enough, and I was paying close enough attention by then, that I caught it. His jaw had tightened. Not in a trembling way. In a controlled way. The way a person's jaw tightens when they are exercising a discipline that is costing them something. The instigator seemed to interpret this as victory. I watched him turn back to his friends, rolling his shoulders, reclaiming the performance. He said something, I caught the words, didn't even flinch, and the group gave him the laugh he was asking for, though it was quieter than before, and the girl had lowered her phone slightly. He should have left it there. Anyone watching could see he should have left it there. But, he didn't. He turned back to the guard, and this time he started talking. Not performing. Not doing a bit. Actually talking in this weird half-apologetic, half-escalating way that made no sense, the way people talk when they've crossed a line and don't know how to get back behind it. He said something about how it was just water, it was just a laugh, he wasn't trying to disrespect anyone, but, also, and here's where it turned, he added something. A comment about the uniform. About the whole thing being theater and performance and how the guard was basically a prop. That last word landed visibly. Not on the guard, whose face remained composed, whose gaze remained fixed. But, on the crowd. I heard a sharp exhale from someone behind me. A man about 10 feet to my left, older, British accent, said clearly, enough. And, then, I noticed them. 2 police officers, making their way through the crowd from the direction of the gate. They'd been called, or more likely they'd seen the situation developing themselves, because that whole area is under constant watch, and security around that entrance is not casual or relaxed no matter how much it might look that way to tourists. These weren't the ornamental kind. They were Metropolitan Police, in their dark uniforms, and they were moving with that calm, purposeful pace that means they're not panicking but they are absolutely taking this seriously. The crowd parted for them without being asked. People just moved. The instigator noticed them about 2 seconds before they reached him, and his whole energy changed. He straightened. He pulled his sunglasses down over his eyes, which was somehow the most telling gesture, this instinctive reach for something to hide behind. The first officer, a woman with close-cropped hair and an expression that communicated nothing except professional attention, spoke to him calmly. "Sir. Could you step back from the barrier, please?" Not a question. Technically phrased as a request. But, not a question. The instigator started explaining, the words came out fast, tangled, the tone of someone who can hear themselves and knows they don't sound good. The water was an accident, it slipped, he was just playing around, it was hot out, everyone was doing stuff like this, he didn't mean anything by it. The officer let him talk. Didn't interrupt. Didn't validate. just waited until there was a natural pause, and then said, quietly, the behavior directed at the guard, the verbal comments, and, now the water, that's considered harassment. Do you understand that? The instigator blinked. I think the word harassment landed differently than he expected. There's something about that word, the legal weight of it, the way it repositions what you've been doing from having a laugh to doing something with a name, that visibly recalibrated the situation for him. It was a joke, he said. But, he said it quietly. I understand that, the officer replied. But, there are laws around this area and, the treatment of personnel on duty. We're going to need to have a conversation. The second officer, a tall young man who hadn't said anything yet, was watching the rest of the group. Not threateningly. Just watching. The girl had definitely stopped recording. The others had developed that posture people get when they want to communicate I am not involved without actually leaving. The crowd was fully engaged now. Not in the voyeuristic, giddy way they'd been watching before when it was just an idiot doing something stupid for content. Now people were watching the way people watch something that matters. There was a seriousness to the attention. An older couple near me, tourists themselves from the sound of their accent, exchanged a look. The woman said softly to her husband, he has to stand there and, just take that. All day long. He can't even defend himself. Her husband nodded. That's what he signed up for. Doesn't mean it's right. A teenager standing nearby, who'd probably been laughing a minute ago, was now chewing her thumbnail and, looking uncomfortable. Good. She should be uncomfortable. So should everyone who'd been encouraging it. The guard himself hadn't moved. Hadn't acknowledged any of it, not the police, not the crowd's shifting energy, not the muffled conversation happening 7 feet from where he stood. His eyes were back on their invisible point. His rifle was at his side. His bearskin had absorbed the weak sun. But, I kept watching his jaw. And, once, just once, I saw him swallow. That was the moment that broke something open in my chest. Not the water hitting him. Not the instigator's words. That single, quiet swallow, the body betraying, just barely, what the discipline was working so hard to contain. He was not a statue. He was a person, swallowing his dignity on a Tuesday morning in July while 100 strangers watched. They walked him away from the barrier. The instigator, I mean. The police officers led him, gently, no force, no drama, about 30 feet down the path to a quieter spot near the wall. His friends followed in that uncertain, hovering way of people who don't know if they're in trouble too. The girl finally put her phone entirely in her bag, which told me more than anything else about how the mood had changed. The crowd closed the gap they'd left. Not cruelly, not celebrating. Just the natural way crowds redistribute when the source of tension has shifted. And, the guard stood there. He was still standing exactly where he'd been standing the entire time. Same posture. Same position. Same fixed gaze at his invisible point. If you'd shown up at that moment knowing nothing about what had just happened, you'd have seen nothing remarkable, just the standard picture postcard image of a royal guard at his post, quiet and, still and, untouchable. Except now I couldn't look at him the way I would have before. That's the thing about witnessing something like this. It changes the lens. Where I'd seen a uniform before, I now saw a person inside it. I saw the wet patch on his collar, still damp, slowly drying in the morning air. I saw the way his hands held the rifle, not rigid, not trembling, just held, with a steadiness that had to be deliberate. I saw the way his chest rose and fell in a breathing pattern that was a little too controlled, a little too measured to be entirely natural. He was managing himself. Carefully. Continuously. I found myself thinking about what training must look like for these guards. Not just the physical drills, the marching, the uniform standards, but the psychological conditioning. The practice of not reacting. The work of maintaining complete outward stillness while the inside continues doing what the inside always does, feeling things, registering things, being affected by things. Because they don't stop being human just because they're on duty. That sounds obvious when I say it out loud. Of course they're human. But, somewhere in the performance of it, in the bearskin hats and the red tunics and the centuries of ceremonial tradition, there's an invitation to forget that. To treat them like part of the backdrop. Like an attraction rather than a person who drove to work that morning, had breakfast, called someone they love, and then stood here for hours while tourists circled them. That forgetting is how a water bottle becomes a joke. I stayed for a while after the police intervention. I'm not sure why, exactly. I'd seen the main event, such as it was. I had plenty of photos. There were a dozen other things I'd planned to do that day: Westminster, the Tate, a walk along the embankment. But I stayed. Partly I think it was some kind of instinct to bear witness. To not just move on the way everyone else seemed to be moving on, already reabsorbing into their own days, pulling out their phones for the standard palace selfie. Partly I think I just wanted to see him be okay. The conversation between the police and the instigators group lasted maybe 15 minutes. I couldn't hear most of it from where I was, just the occasional fragment when voices rose slightly. At one point the instigator ran his hand over his face in a way that looked genuinely distressed. His friends stood close to him, and some of the bravado had completely left the group. They looked young. They looked embarrassed. Good, I thought. Then, immediately felt slightly complicated about thinking it, because I've been young too, and young people do stupid things, and I've done stupid things, and the gap between a stupid thing and a harmful thing is sometimes thinner than we realize until someone shows us. Still, the guard deserved the embarrassment they were feeling. He'd earned it without being able to say a single word. The officers spoke to the whole group for a while. I gathered from body language that they were issuing some kind of formal warning, rather than making arrests. At one point the first officer made a gesture toward the guard, not dramatically, just a small indication, as if making a point about the actual person who'd been affected by this. All 5 members of the group looked in the guard's direction. None of them said anything. But they looked. The instigator looked the longest. I watched his face during those few seconds. And here's the part that surprised me: there was something real happening in it. Something past the embarrassment and the caught-out feeling. Something that looked, honestly, like the beginning of understanding. Like he was seeing the guard for the first time as a person. As someone his joke had actually landed on. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I'm being generous to someone who, 20 minutes ago, I had very little generosity for. But I don't think so. I think there are moments when the truth of something breaks through, even for people who weren't looking for it. Eventually the police finished. The group was allowed to go. They didn't leave immediately. They stood together for a moment, quieter than they'd been all morning, some kind of conversation passing between them that I couldn't hear and didn't need to. The girl said something with her hands, gesturing. One of the quieter guys from the group, the one who'd been shaking his head earlier, whose discomfort had been visible throughout, put his hand briefly on the instigator's shoulder. Then, they moved away. Down the mall, heading east, back toward the city. The instigator walked with his hands in his pockets. Sunglasses back over his eyes. His posture different from how it had been, smaller, somehow. Less performed. I watched them until they disappeared into the crowd. Then, I turned back to the guard. He was still there. He would be there for hours more. He would stand in that exact spot, in that exact posture, while the day continued around him. More tourists cycling through, more photographs, more children asking questions, more pigeons, more of London's indifferent, beautiful noise. He gave no sign that he knew I was watching. No sign that he registered the fact that the particular group of people who just made his morning significantly harder were now gone. No visible exhale, no releasing of tension, no small human moment of relief. Just the stillness. Ongoing. Maintained. But I was close enough now to notice what I'd missed before, or maybe what had changed. The set of his expression was the same. The posture was the same. But there was something in the way he was standing that was slightly different from the way I'd first seen him, before any of this happened. He was standing straighter. Fractionally. Almost imperceptibly. But straighter. And I thought, there it is. That's what pride looks like when it has nowhere else to go. When someone has taken something from you, your comfort, your mourning, your dignity, and you can't respond with words or action, so you respond the only way you're allowed to. You stand a little taller. I bought a coffee from a cart about 100 meters away and sat on a bench and wrote notes about what I'd seen, the way I always do when something gets under my skin. I didn't know at the time I'd eventually turn them into this. I thought I was just processing. A family sat near me, parents, 3 kids ranging from maybe 5 to 12. The kids were doing what kids do near Buckingham Palace, asking questions, getting distracted, arguing about who got to hold the map. The 12-year-old, a girl with a long braid and a backpack shaped like a bear, was looking toward the gate. Looking at the guard. "Why doesn't he move?" she asked. Her father, without looking up from the map he was studying, said, "Because he's on duty." "But doesn't he want to?" The father looked up at that. He looked at the guard for a moment, genuinely considering the question. "Probably," he said finally. "But wanting to and doing it are different things." The girl seemed to accept that. She thought about it for a moment, her head tilted. "That must be really hard," she said. And her father said, "Yes. It is." I thought about that exchange for the rest of the day. I thought about it on the tube. I thought about it at the Tate, standing in front of a painting I kept not seeing because I was somewhere else in my head. I thought about it over dinner, alone at a small Italian place near my hotel, turning the day around in my mind. I have this tendency, to treat discipline as something cold. Something robotic. When we see a person exercising extreme control over themselves, maintaining a standard or a commitment in the face of difficulty or discomfort or outright provocation, we sometimes read it as inhuman. We use words like machine, like robot, like programmed. As if the absence of visible reaction means the absence of interior life. But the guard's swallow. The tightening jaw. The standing a little straighter. Those weren't the gestures of a machine. They were the gestures of a person who had made a choice repeatedly, every day, across an entire career, to hold to something even when holding to it cost them something. To absorb what couldn't be rejected. To maintain dignity on behalf of something larger than a single moment. I don't know his name. I'll never know his name. He'll never know I wrote this, or that a stranger sat on a bench drinking bad cart coffee and thought about him for the rest of the day. But I've thought about what it must be like to do what he does, to show up every day and stand in a place where you were simultaneously seen by thousands and noticed by almost none of them. To be photographed constantly without ever being truly witnessed. To have your composure tested, again and again, by people who aren't malicious necessarily, just thoughtless people who've forgotten that the uniform has a person inside it. And I've thought about the instigator, too. What he went home with that night. Whether he told the story and, if he did, how he told it, whether it was a funny anecdote or something he quietly filed under things he wished he hadn't done. Whether he saw the guard in his mind later, the way I did. Whether the water bottle felt different to him in retrospect than it had in the moment. I hope it did. I genuinely hope it did, not in a punishing way, but in a way that meant something was learned. Because the lesson available in that moment wasn't subtle. It was right there, standing 12 feet away, wearing it on his collar. You can take a joke too far. You can treat a boundary like an invitation. You can mistake someone's restraint for permission, their discipline for distance, their silence for approval. And then, a police officer says the word harassment and the whole frame shifts. And, suddenly, what felt like a laugh feels like something you put on a person. Something they had to carry. The last thing I remember from that bench is watching a new group of tourists cluster near the guard for their photos. 2 parents lifting a toddler so he could see better. A woman carefully arranging her group. 3 teenage boys taking turns standing next to the guard's post, grinning at their phones. All of it ordinary. All of it harmless. And the guard stood through all of it. Still. Present. Swallowing whatever needed to be swallowed. Standing a little taller than he'd been an hour ago. The day moved around him like water around a stone. And he held.